So my brothers and my sisters, as we embrace this urgency of creating the beloved community, now is the time to be loved. Love means understanding, redemptive goodwill toward all, which seeks nothing in return. So be loved by implementing the demands of justice to eliminate the school to prison pipeline that has so many black children entrapped. Be loved by correcting voting policies that seek to suppress the votes of millions of black and brown people. Be loved and implement the demands of justice by transforming a society that is disproportionately violent toward black lives, including black transgendered lives and indigenous lives. Be loved and correct false narratives and economic policies that continue to divide and pit poor and working class black and white people against each other. Be loved and implement demands of justice where systems and structures are deconstructed and lead the way of living in community that reimagines just, humane, equitable, and sustainable policies, practices, and behaviors. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them who hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and abuse you. Be loved and do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God. Good evening, beloved community. Tonight, we convene under a theme that strikes at the very heart of who we are and who we must become. Humanity first. Reframing immigration through the lens of dignity. We are challenged to see not with suspicion, but with sacred regard, to speak not from fear, but from a place of love. We are in a defining moment. Across our nation, we're witnessing division, harmful legislation, rhetoric that targets our immigrant sisters and brothers, legislation that threatens to strip away dignity and devalue lives. At a time when policies are dividing families and fear is driving national discourse, we must remember what my father, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., described as our inescapable network of mutuality. He envisioned a world house, a global family, in which we learn to live together in peace or perish, yes, together as fools. That vision was not a poetic ideal. It was a prophetic warning, and today it is more relevant than ever. We are watching the fallout of legislation that threatens the very dignity and safety of immigrant communities. Legislation that has the potential to normalize cruelty, to dehumanize the stranger, and to reinforce the false narrative that some lives are more valuable than others. But let us be clear. Immigration is not just a political issue. It is a moral one that demands we approach it not with indifference, but with compassion. Not with calculation, but with conviction. Not with callousness, but with courage to create a just and humane immigration system which recognizes we can be a nation who can uphold just laws while simultaneously respect human dignity. To frame immigration solely in terms of economics, border security, law and order, or political expedience is to miss the heart of the matter. The heart is humanity. The heart is compassion. The heart is dignity. And when dignity is denied to any of us, it is diminished in all of us. Daddy said, power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love, correcting everything that stands against love. So as we reflect on immigration and the rights of those seeking refuge, let us use our power, our voices, our votes, our values to implement justice rooted in love. Not that soft, sentimental kind, but agape love. The kind of love that defends the voiceless, that bears the burdens of the oppressed, that sees beyond borders and bureaucracies to the humanity in each person. The kind of love that can enforce laws without targeting, terrorizing, tormenting, and trampling upon people. My mother, Coretta Scott King, reminded us that freedom and justice cannot be parceled out in pieces to suit political convenience. In other words, freedom and justice should not be pursued only at certain times or under certain circumstances, but should transcend time and politics and become a way of life. And tonight, I invite you, each of you, to consider how we live that out with respect to our immigrant brothers and sisters. How do we enact legislation and employ practices that protect our borders from illegal crossings without stripping people of their dignity? How do we identify and restrain those immigrants who have violated laws of crime and not merely of status, without employing inhumane tactics that terrorize, separate, and divide families and children from parents? How do we advocate for the refuge and welcome the asylum seeker, not as an inconvenience, but as a sacred soul that needs a safe haven and a pathway to citizenship? How do we, in this season of challenge, rise with courage to demand not just reform, but a revolution of values? We need a revolution of values, one that centers dignity, equity, and agape love in how we see, talk about, and treat our immigrant brothers and sisters. That's the kind of love that doesn't discriminate, that doesn't categorize people as us and them. It's the kind of love that uplifts, that sacrifices, that fights for the well-being of others, and is thoughtful of the humanity in others as it seeks to find solutions. During the beloved community talks tonight, we will hear voices that challenge us, stories that open our eyes, and truths that may unsettle us. Because change does not come from comfort, it comes from conviction. And conviction grows when we truly see one another. Let this evening not be the end of your reflection, but the beginning of your commitment. Let it stir deeper questions within you. I invite you to listen deeply, to engage courageously, and to reflect inwardly. Ask yourself, what kind of nation do we want to be? One that punishes the vulnerable, or one that protects them? One that divides by fear, or one that unites by love? One that only practices law and order, or one that respects justice and dignity while enforcing law and order? What kind of society are we shaping for the generations to come? Will we be remembered for walls or for bridges, for exclusion or for embrace? Will we be remembered for discovering the most humane way to balance law and order with justice and dignity? Let us never forget what my father said. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly, and for some strange reason, I can't be all that I ought to be until you are all that you ought to be, and you cannot be all that you ought to be until I am all that I ought to be. This is not just philosophy. It is truth. When we dehumanize one, we damage us all. When we turn away from the stranger, we turn away from ourselves. As we move through this night, let's dare to dream, and more importantly, let's dare to do. Let us build a society where no one is called or seen as alien or illegal, where every human being is treated with dignity, and where justice rolls down like waters for all, regardless of origin, language, or status. This is our mandate. This is our movement. This is our beloved community moment. Welcome to the Beloved Community Talks.
Welcome. It is good to be with you. I am honored to serve as tonight's moderator, but really, I'm simply a catalyst for conversation. Everybody is. You are too. This is not going to be the buttoned up, measured conversation that you would typically expect. We're in a different time, and it requires a level of candor, directness, and we will have that today. Welcome to tonight's Beloved Community Talk. I'm Rashad, Richey, and I have the pleasure of serving as the host of Indisputable. People call it a broadcast platform. It is a method of service. Very thankful for the success of that show and many of you who support it. We're in essential times. The essential times that we are in require essential conversations. This is one of them. Immigration. Immigration is a proxy for everything else. Today, the word is immigration, but that word has been, well, we'll talk about that tonight. Let's see how that connects back to us as humanity. There is no transformation without acknowledgement. There are some things that will be acknowledged tonight. Our focus will speak to the heart of who we are as a community, who we are as a nation. Humanity first, reframing immigration through the lens of dignity. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once spoke of a world house, and he spoke of these dynamics often about how we're all interconnected. And many of us assume these things were policies of philosophy, and they are not. They're more real than you could ever imagine. I'm also a physics professor. We're learning more about dynamics like quantum entanglement and quantum coherence. Basically, how everything is actually connected, and at its fundamental level is simply energy or spirit. And that what happens on one side of the world impacts the other side of the world faster than the speed of light. The effect is immediate. Well, we are connected in the same way. Dr. King talked about a vision of global interdependence where people of all races, of all faiths, of all nationalities, backgrounds, they live together. They live together in peace. We can call that the reign of peace spoken. But he also warned us that without this radical revolution of values, one grounded in love, compassion, and justice, we risk destroying that very house, this world house. Immigration, too, often is politicized, debated, to dehumanize individuals, call them things like illegal. My faith background says God made no human being that is illegal. Doesn't exist. At the center of this challenge will be creating that dignity, talking about that dignity of humanity. So tonight we ask, what does it mean to lead with love in how we treat those seeking refuge? How do we care? How do we create a country where compassion is the policy and dignity is a right, not a privilege? I'm honored to be joined by some extraordinary people, individuals that have been doing this for a long time, but they have also done it from the perspective of heart, motivated by absolute people and the advocacy of justice. They work these values every day through adversity, truth telling. They keep coming back. They're proven. First, it is my honor, it is my privilege to introduce our fearless leader, Dr. Bernice A. King, CEO of the King Center, global peace advocate and daughter of the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. Dr. King continues her legacy by advocating, as her parents did, continuing the legacy for us who look up to her. She passes the baton on a regular basis. Very thankful for the honor. By advancing nonviolent social change, transformation, and building the beloved community in our time. We're also joined by Jose Antonio Vargas, Pulitzer Prize winner, noted journalist, filmmaker, and founder of Define American. As one of the most visible undocumented immigrants in America, Jose has spent his career challenging the narratives, the false narratives, and reshaping national consciousness around the identity or around identity and belonging. Next, we welcome Teresa, Romero, president of the United Farm Workers and the first Latina immigrant woman to lead a national labor union in the United States of America. She brings decades of experience in defending the dignity and rights of essential immigrant workers. And later in the conversation, we're going to bring in one more advocate and a true humanitarian, Maria Teresa Kumar. And this leader, this president and CEO of Voto Latino, one of the nation's most effective voices for civic engagement, democracy defense, and voter empowerment for others. Together, these voices will resonate, but your voice is required. So there will come a time when I engage you directly, so will the panel. So let's begin this evening's beloved community talk. All right. Start. Thank you, panel, for being here. I just want to get directly into it. We're going to talk about the moral imperative of immigration, which is a heck of a way to put it. The moral imperative of immigration. And I want to begin with values. Dr. King, your father envisioned this thing called the World House. And I think the quote was, "We have inherited a large house, a great world house in which we have to live together." And as I grow older, I realize that these doctrines were so much more than philosophical truths. There's something very practical and tangible about what your father said and what it means today. So how do we deal with that, talk to that in the context of our current immigration, not only policy, but our heart toward it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rashad, and to all of the guests for joining us tonight. And that question is really at the heart and soul of this very important and critical issue in our nation and across the world, frankly, because people are trying to find refuge and safe haven all across this world. And they are looking for nations who will open their arms and their hearts. And that's what's most important. First, let's start here and give a little bit of a context. So Dad wrote a book called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos of Community, which I want to encourage everybody to pick up and read. And in that last chapter, he summed up so much about the state of the world and the threats that we were faced with in the world. He called them the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. And he started this last chapter called The World House with a story of this piece of paper that was found and talks about what we've inherited, meaning it's something that is a reality, an isness of sorts. And that is, as you said, this global world house. All of us recognize, and I think we all respect, regardless of the current issues around immigration, we all recognize and respect geographical and national boundaries. But when it comes to issues of humanity, that is when those lines should all actually become artificial. And our hearts should then begin to lead the way, not in an unthoughtful way, but in a manner that recognizes that every human being on this earth is a person with inherent value and dignity and worth. My father studied personalism. And in that, he recognized and valued, and it connected with his faith tradition, Christianity, with the Imago Dei, that we're all imprinted with this image of God within us. That makes us connected as a human family. So what I do to you, I'm actually doing to me, and that ultimately what threatens me will eventually threaten you. So we have to band together and find, as he said, a way to live together as brothers and sisters, or we'll be forced to perish together as fools. So when we think about this whole issue around immigration, we start first with saying, this is an entire world house. We live in different spaces. We live in different rooms of this world house. And yes, we must have rules and regulations. People have rules and regulations in their own house that are raising families. But there's a thing that we have to touch and agree upon. And that is, you are my brother, you are my sister. And so when it comes to your well-being, when it comes to your safety, then I have to be committed to doing what is necessary to protect you, to come alongside of you, and to be thoughtful in coming up with a solution. What bothers me today is this whole notion about law and order and just moving people out of the way without any thoughtfulness past the individual. You know, people are connected. We are tied. We're tied to families. We're tied to community. We're tied to the economics of a community. I mean, we're all tied together. And so we can do this in a much more humane way. And I think Daddy provides us a blueprint, starting with this notion that is so hard for so many people to get, which is, hey, y'all, we are interconnected. We are interrelated. Because of science and technology, we're not in this just agriculture world anymore. We have created a world that ties us together much more quickly than, you know, in many years past. But what we haven't done is we haven't kept pace with the growth and the technology on the scientific and the technology side with our moral and spiritual side. So that's what we're talking about. How do we overcome that lag? Because that's exactly the space in which this whole immigration issue fits.
That's very powerful. I'm going to piggyback on that to a degree, and I want to go to Ms. Romero. Um, what I hear Dr. King saying is that tools, the toys, but the spiritual maturity isn't there to connect with how to utilize it to solve things. It seems as if we are more polarized than ever, but we have more advanced technology, more advanced understanding, etc. And instead of utilizing it to expand the collective consciousness of humanity, we have utilized it to either A, expand a small group, or B, to literally engage in absolute restriction of other individuals having access to it. We do this through economic policies, etc. there are moral lessons that inform our policy lessons. So my question to you, what moral lessons do we learn from the farm workers movement that can be applied to this?
If I were to say just one word, it would be resilience. Farm workers have been excluded or were excluded from many protections back in the 1930s, and they were excluded from the National Labor Relations Act. And the reason was at the time the workers the majority of them were Black people. And nowadays, the majority of workers that are working in the fields are brown people. And a big majority of them are undocumented. And we have fought, and like Dr. King said, nonviolently for decades to protect this workforce. If we remember in the 1960s when Cesar Chavez was organizing, at that time there were many Filipino workers working in the fields and a lot of Mexican workers working in the fields. And the employers would make time and spend a lot of effort putting each group against each other. And it did not work. It did not work because the Filipino workers came to Cesar Chavez to come together with them and go on strike. At that time, Cesar was not ready to do it. He didn't think the workers that he was representing were ready to do it. But his wife, Helen Chavez, I told them, what are we? Aren't we a union that is supposed to protect all workers? And they came together in solidarity, in peaceful. They worked together. They talked to each other. They listened to each other. They understood their challenges. And when people in power tried to turn them against each other, it did not work because they were united. They understood what the cause was, and they understood that they needed to work together to make sure that their future and their protections and their dignity was respected. So they just they were ready to fight peacefully. They were ready to look at each other as brothers and sisters who had the same problems, who had the same challenges, and were willing to do what it took and to sacrifice to be able to win. And I think this is what we need to do now. Come together, work together, protecting the people that are putting food on our tables and all immigrants that are working here in this country to make things work. And do not let anybody divide us. We can do it if we stick together.
You said something really powerful, Ms. Romero. You talked about their resilience. And it sounds like when they came to the table, or when people came to their table, they had dignity and they were going to hold on to that dignity. They were not going to let it go. We have so many forces that literally are designed to strip you of your dignity before that even happens. So by the time it happens, there's very little dignity left because of the systematic design that many have gone through. And naturally, that's part of the conversation. I want to just do a quick follow-up, Ms. Romero. For those who feel as if that dignity left a long time ago, they feel no shame. As an advocate for those who have dealt with and are dealing with drug and alcohol addiction, you see that in their eyes, but you also see it return when they're sober. You see it back. You see their spark. They have dignity. They stand up for things. They typically become light workers. They stand up for everybody else. So what lessons in that, from your experience, would you bring to those who say, I don't know if I even have dignity now?
For years, especially for immigrant workers, especially for undocumented people, they believe that they don't have any worth, that people don't see them, that they are, and I hear it from workers, that they feel invisible. If we think about it, during the pandemic, farm workers were deemed essential, and they had to work, and they were there every single day to put food on our tables, and some of them paid with their lives. But they feel, and they tell me right now, that they are treated as if they were disposable, and that it has taken years of rhetoric, of actions to feel people that are not worthy, that should be ashamed of who they are, where they come from, or the color of their skin. And this is not something that anybody should feel, anybody should believe. We all as human beings are worth it. And if we made a mistake at one point in our lives, that doesn't mean that we are never going to be able to redeem ourselves. I don't think anybody here can ever say that we had never made a mistake. What I want to make sure that people understand, that we are human beings with dignity, human beings who need to be respected and appreciated for who we are and what we do.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And when someone is having a difficult time finding the dignity in themselves, it's up to us to make sure we remind them that we see the dignity in them even when they can't trace it. And that's how you resonate to it as well.
Yes. Very well said.
Yes. This question goes to Mr. Vargas. Dear brother, I appreciate you being a student of consciousness and being an advocate to challenge in the box thinking. So there's something I heard a wise guy tell me one time. He said, "It's something more powerful than your behavior." And he said, "It's your being. Your being is more powerful than anything else." And it helped me to understand that humanity is sacred in itself, that humanity itself is a very sacred thing. And you push the narrative not by just the word or phraseology, but also by how you express and how you live. So what does it mean to be visible and undocumented in a very public and intentional way in this era?
Well, that's a loaded question, and I will try to answer that as directly as I can. The first thing I'll say is thank you so much for having me here. I have to say I've had a couple of goosebumps moments in the few minutes we have been doing this panel. One is listening to Dr. King speak with such moral clarity about this moment that we are in as it relates to immigrants in this country. You know, I've been doing a lot of TV, just going on cable news on MSNBC and CNN these past few days, and it's been really difficult because sometimes too often I feel as if we're talking about undocumented people, we're talking about immigrants, still kind of removed from the everyday life that we lead every day in this country. So to hear that kind of moral clarity is rare and is so urgently needed. So let me say that. And the second part is when I outed myself as undocumented, you know, I voluntarily raised my hand in 2011 when President Obama was in the White House and the Obama administration was deporting about 400,000 immigrants a year. As I was writing that essay, and all the lawyers told me, you can't publicly say in the New York Times that you broke laws and that you're here illegally. The moment you do this, we can't do anything to help you. But as I was, you know, the more the lawyers said don't do it, the more I felt like I needed to do it. And the essay that guided me as I was writing that essay was Letter from Birmingham Jail, which I was introduced to when I was in middle school. I was fortunate enough to go attend a school district in Mountain View, California, where Google is, although I got there before Google got there. I immigrated in 1993. I was fortunate enough to attend a school district where we were assigned to read Letter from Birmingham Jail. And I'm saying that knowing that there are many schools across this country, in many places in the country, that is erasing history And to me, and to many other people, African American history, Black history is American history. So as I've done this work of telling the truth, because that's really all I'm doing. When I outed myself as undocumented, all I basically did was, wait a second, this is not what you think it is. The undocumented population is as diverse as the country itself. And to that end, we rarely talk about undocumented Black people. We rarely talk about undocumented Asian people. The fastest growing undocumented population in this country are actually coming from India and China and the Philippines, not from Latin America. I actually think we owe the Mexican population of this country an apology for having racially profiled this issue as much as we have, even though the vast majority of Mexicans in this country, millions of Mexicans in this country, have been in this country before there was the United States of America. So that's the kind of clarity that we're missing and that we're not really digesting and seeing from the media we're consuming.
Man, that's strong. And we are in an era where facts and truth is optional. So a quick follow-up with you on that. When the public seems to be swayed more by the repetition of a narrative than the validity of it,
Yeah.
What's the fight back?
Way more complicated than ever. Let me just tell you a brief story. I've been detained once back in 2014. I don't know if you remember. There was that first actually wave of unaccompanied minors from Central America walking, right, from Central America through Mexico across the border to Texas. So I went to Texas at the border. I got arrested on a flight on my way out of Texas at the Rio Grande Valley at the border there. And when I was detained for like only 8 hours. And one of the first people who called me when I got released was John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, who I was fortunate enough to have befriended. And Congressman Lewis thought that it was a stunt, that I had like choreographed this. And I said to him, "Oh, no, sir. It was not, I was not meant to be arrested. The last thing I wanted was to have my grandmother watching me getting handcuffed in the news on CNN." And then we met up afterwards. He invited me to lunch because that's how gracious he is of a man. And he said to me that back then, when he was leading SNCC during the Selma era, there were 3 television stations. Everybody read the newspaper and listened to the radio. So how people heard about the news was much simpler. He said that part of his job was a media strategist, that the goal for him as an organizer back then was to get the New York Times, the Baltimore Sun, the Philadelphia Inquirer down to the South, document what was happening, and then wake the consciousness of the public. And now, Dr. Richey, as you know, way more complicated now. I mean, I've started talking about how we live in a post-truth, post-literate era where everything is just content, where you can't tell anymore what's fact and what's not factual, where we have an administration that has basically organized millions of people upon lies that they have told and have convinced themselves to tell about quote unquote illegal aliens. We have organized ourselves around lies. And I think to answer your question most directly, I think you are the media. I think every single one of us has a responsibility to not only educate ourselves, but to educate everybody around us. So when anybody says to you, "Oh, these illegals are mooching off society," or they talk to you about these wetbacks or talk to you, it is your job to call them out. It is your job to say, "Wait a second, where are you getting that information from?" It is your job to inform people and make sure that people are not swimming in their own ignorance.
I'm going to echo the post-truth dynamic to Dr. King. Dr. King, we're going to talk about what does revolution, this revolution of values mean. And I'm going to give you a little context of my experience. I reported on a story a few weeks ago where we had reporters outside of a church, and the church was having a MAGA event. Okay. And one of the questions was about immigration. And a couple was posed the question, would you accept Jesus if he just walked into America? Because, you know, he's not from here. And the couple said, absolutely, if he had his proper papers. They were going to church to worship the Christ. But at the same time, holding on to the doctrine in their soul of this other God, maybe their true God, which is this othering of anyone who doesn't have this thing called a paper or documentation. So when folks going to church, Dr. King, saying things like that about Yahshua, and we're talking about a revolution of values, what does that mean in the context of immigration? And where do you even start? Because I'm defining the middle by defining the polarity of it, by defining the ends of the thing. That's an extreme example, but those examples exist. So what is this revolution of values?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I wanted to kind of bridge from where Jose was speaking to answer the question. You know, one thing that I've observed is that there are a lot of voices around issues, period, whatever the issues are. What seems to be missing in today's times, which I think my father was pretty brilliant with, is aligning messaging, collective messaging with intention. I think we cannot leave everyone to their own way of doing it in these times. And I think that's what we feel like if we're stripping away something, if we unify voices and try to be repetitive on message. But that's exactly what has happened with those who have created this kind of environment and atmosphere right now. They have been good on unified messaging and repetitive over and over again, whether it be in that pulpit or in the news media. And so I think, you know, if we don't find a way to create a truth campaign that is repetitive, identifying those things that we need to combat, you know, and speak to in this current atmosphere, I think we're going to lose just on a false narrative. It's just, you know, I think about advertisement. The reason you see the same commercial, I just saw that commercial literally at the other break. I mean, I know it now. I can repeat it because they know the subliminal power of all of this and what it does to the mind and the conscience, and then how it influences the behavior. Well, we've got to figure out how to do the same thing on the opposite side. And I don't think we've done a good job of that. And so people in those religious circles, unfortunately, are holding true to these narratives. So how do we correct these falsities? We're going to have a collective message over and over and over again, like a broken record. That's just my simplistic response to all of this.
I actually think that is the answer. I think the answer is always much simpler. We see that it works on the other side. Why wouldn't it work on the righteous side?
It works very well. I mean, I can't tell you, I don't want to call names in this, but I remember on the voting front when the message was make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. We all remember that. I met with someone and those words were put out there. And when I left that meeting, I just started listening to news cycles, you know, being in other environments where people of that same political party were part of. And it was like they had the same script. They repeated it. Easy to vote, hard to cheat, over and over and over again until they convinced people that that's what they were doing when they really weren't. It was the opposite, making it hard to vote. And easy to cheat. So I don't know. Some things we make complex, and it's very much a scheme. And many people, as we know, win a lot of things on a public relations ground, and especially today.
That's right. That's right. I think words are seeds, and those seeds resonate. They can grow. They can be nurtured. And what these guys are doing is putting out seeds, and these seeds are very coherent because of a belief structure that they've created within a very defined demographic, and that defined demographic will believe whatever they say. There was another dynamic, Dr. King, that was interesting to me when states started to echo the sentiment of you no longer need to have a license to bear arms. You don't need a license to carry a concealed weapon. All of these elements of where you can now take a gun. And they did this under the guise of constitutional right. And they said, well, since it's a constitutional right, you do not need any additional documentation, registration, et cetera. And so they started to eliminate the statutory barriers to it. And I remember in this public debate with a conservative former congressman who was such an advocate of this until I posed this question. Is it not true that your right to vote is a constitutionally protected right? But in order to exercise your right to vote, you must register to vote. You must present ID to vote. But to exercise your right to bear arms, you no longer need a registry. You no longer have to present permit or ID for carrying the weapon. Law enforcement, it is illegal in Georgia for a law enforcement officer to even ask you if you have that weapon legally. It's against the law now, statutorily illegal. So that's the narrative, that's the fake out, right? So one is defined as a constitutional expression of freedom. The other one is defined as a statutory requirement for freedom. All right, yeah, okay. So,
well, we know hypocrisy is alive and well, and it's that premium, and it's used by people of all parties. In fact,
yes.
So yeah, people want to push a certain agenda. They do that. Yeah, and quite effectively. All right, so I know we're wrapping up this segment in just a moment. I have one more question for Ms. Romero. My dad was a black farm in America, and he received this settlement from the federal government. It was right on time. It was right when I was entering as a freshman in college, and so I had a little change in my pocket. Okay, it came right on time. I remember Dr. Laurie was one of the advocates for them, and he would actually be in the courtroom almost as if he was an attorney, talking directly to the judge and talking directly to the group. In that, I learned what systemic, intentional racial discrimination was. Before that, I did not have an idea of how it worked. I knew what it was in concept, but I learned what it meant in practical application. And very simply, they just said to black farmers, you get no loans. And we give all the white farmers all the loans, and then we forgive the loans if they get a land grant, etc. I mean, it was quite extreme. It was really no wiggle room out of it. But that harm cannot be remedied with a $300,000 settlement 50 years later, because there's no inheritance. I didn't inherit the farm. I was supposed to, should have. All right. Well, where would I have started the exception? So talk to us about how these individuals who farm, who till our ground, who are the ones sweating to make sure we have the produce. Why is it that we have not prioritized their movement in a way that is reflective of how much we depend on it?
You know, I unfortunately, the reason is because there are people of color, because they are immigrants, because they're undocumented. And let me tell you, I think the color of our skin should not define our worth. The work that we do should not define our worth. Where we come from should not define our worth. The language we speak, our native language, should not define our worth. I have the honor and privilege of serving farm workers. And they are the hardest working people that I have ever met in very difficult conditions. And if you drive in California through the 99 freeway, you will see a lot of farms, but I can guarantee you that most of those drivers do not stop and think how hard it is, how difficult it is. Why is it that people of color are the only ones that can do or are willing to do these jobs or are able to do these jobs? And the rhetoric that we were talking about earlier is what exists right now. We hear it, especially right now with social media, that we have many people depend on for their news and to learn what's happening in the world, which is a big mistake, makes it to where somebody says something and it's taken as truth. They said immigrants are criminals. How many times have we heard that? And I can guarantee you that most immigrants are here and most undocumented people are just here to work and to support their families. So we need to be able to make sure that everybody sees those people. Everybody sees the sacrifices that they have made. Everybody sees their family. Look, I talk to children who they're telling me they don't want to go to school because they don't know if mom and dad are going to be back home when they get home. And we're talking about U.S. citizens that are being raised with fear, with even hatred in their heart, even if they don't know it yet. So if we put a group of the people because of their legal status or the color of their skin into something, we should fight against that. We are individuals that have dreams, that have challenges, that have hopes, and we should be able to and allowed to be able to fulfill those dreams. Like you just said, your dad had a farm, and I can guarantee you that it was very difficult for him to get where he was and to be able to accomplish what he accomplished, and it was just because of the color of his skin. It is time for us to move that and not go back as we're going right now. It is time for all of us to stand up for those who may be afraid, for those who are in danger of just being kidnapped, because there's not being even being arrested. They're being kidnapped and taken from their homes and their families by people who are wearing masks, by people who are driving vehicles that aren't marked, and we don't even know where they are. So we can't go back to that. All of us who can be a voice for those people who are afraid, for those people who are at risk, for those people who don't want to be seen because that they feel that they're protected, we should do it. We should stand up and be a voice for them, but also listen to what it is important to them, not just assume that we know what it is that they want in this world, in this country.
Very well said. I'm going to go to our second theme. And our second theme deals with narratives, media, and public imagination. And Dr. King, that's the reason why what you said is the way, in my opinion, it would have to be dealt with, because it goes back to the human imagination. What is the media shaping? They shape human imagination. What does the rhetoric shape? Human imagination. What does the narrative shape? Human imagination. And instead of enhancing that imagination, we have decided to allow individuals who could not rise up to the levels of the institutions they represent, but they shrunk those institutions to fit them. We have allowed them to also shrink other folk around them. So I'm going to Mr. Vargas on this one. Man, last week, there's a story I did. I get emotional talking about it because it lets you know how selfless people can be. There was this brother, he's undocumented, okay? He's in a small town, and there's this child who is drowning in a lake. Nobody saves the child. He immediately runs in based on all witness testimony, no hesitation, saves this child, stays to talk to the police, and gets arrested because he's undocumented. But see, he knew he was undocumented, brother, before he did any of that. That is the best among us.
Mm-hmm.
The best among us.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's being deported. Now he has his entire life turned upside down. Why? Because of one human being's sensational appetite.
Yeah.
That has been able to permeate into policy decorums all across. But the reality is, if we didn't think this way, if we didn't have some folk among us who were down with this, it wouldn't happen. So while we look at leaders as the problem, they're basically the manifestation of a problem that we can't see. So here we are. So my question to you is about stories, because you know how to tell them, you know how to push the story, even in the way you live your life. How do those stories, in your opinion, shape this narrative? And have you seen them be effective at reshaping the collective consciousness of those that you're trying to get to?
Well, first of all, I think the story that you just told, that hero. And look, I don't want to make it seem as if all immigrants are heroic people, because we're not. I actually think that's part of the complexity of this, right? Like, immigrants are just like everybody else. We're human like everybody else. We're capable of being heroic. We're capable of all of these things. But that story that you told, in a way, is a metaphor for how undocumented people has been thought of in this country, because the narrative around us, right? So let me actually unpack this a little bit more. So each of us here has a story, right? Every single person has a story. Narrative is a collection of stories. And because the anti-immigrant narrative, from conservative talk radio to cable news, it's actually impossible to imagine a cable news channel. I will not name it. I think we know what we're talking about here. It's impossible to think of one cable channel without undocumented people. Like, we're like the star of the show. We are this boogeyman in people's minds when they think about the illegal or the people who are to blame. And so much of this is, again, the lies that we've told, that we have been told, that we have internalized to a point that whatever facts are being said, that undocumented people actually commit less crimes than native-born citizens, that undocumented people pay way more than their share. So, for example, I have been paying taxes to this government since I was 17 years old. I don't know, by the way, if there's a special box at the IRS where if an undocumented person is not supposed to work, our money ends up in that box. But that's billions of dollars that we have collectively paid. Now, this is a country built on taxation without representation. And yet we have 12 million people in this country, most of them tax paying. And if you don't know anything about that, please Google ITIN, ITIN, individual tax ID number. Since the mid-90s, that's how undocumented workers pay taxes. So the government knows we're here. The government is more than happy to collect those taxes. And yet we have no representation. In most states in this country, we cannot drive. In Georgia, where there's 10% of the population is an immigrant population, and a significant percentage of that is undocumented. In Florida, we can't drive. In Georgia, we can't drive. In Texas, we can't drive. How are we supposed to vote? That lie, right? That illegals are voting. Again, complete fabrication, complete lie. And yet, how many people have kept telling it and telling it and telling it that they have believed it? So going back to the point I made a few minutes ago, this is a live that's not just on a cable news channel. It's on YouTube. It's on TikTok. It's on podcasts. So our approach to this has to be as multifaceted as the media ecosystem is. We have to beat it where it's at. And each of us has a responsibility to actually make sure that not only are we informed, that we're informing everybody else around us.
And it's that part right there. That part. I had a dear mentor of mine say, you know, you all are the leaders that we've been looking for. And I tell my college students this and everyone else, you know, we all are the leaders that we've been looking for, every single one of us. And if we don't have that attitude, if we don't have the attitude that says, I am the leader I've been looking for, you are the leader you've been looking for, you're the leader I've been looking for too, and I'm the leader you've been looking for. If we don't have that attitude, we will get into closed conversations where we could actually make a difference in that group and say, you know, that's not really my responsibility. That's not comfortable for me to say. Let me put it this way. Being uncomfortable is the most underrated thing on this planet. I love being uncomfortable because if I'm uncomfortable, something's going to happen. And if you take that to shift the narrative, and Dr. King, I'm coming to you. Your dad was uncomfortable. He was uncomfortable. He was uncomfortable so much that he was uncomfortable for folks' comfort in being uncomfortable. And he decided to shift the public narrative. He had his strategy. He understood the value of narrative because he understood the reality of imagination. I believe that an aspect, a powerful aspect of your father was his just spiritually in-depth understanding of humanity. And how do you take some of that and apply to this?
Ooh, it takes extreme discipline. That's what I can say. He was an extremely disciplined person. You know, a friend of mine whom you know, John O'Brien said, you know, it's important for us to talk without being offensive and to listen without being defensive. My father mastered that. And what I mean is he knew how to stay above the fray and not let whatever is in what was ever in the conversation otherwise throw him off. He had his messages and he was not going to do he was not going to get off track by whatever messaging they were trying to get him on to keep him from staying focused on what he needed to do to keep the people corralled, organized, inspired, uplifted, because he had to do all of this. And yet he was able to understand that which he was opposing, the opposing narrative. He was able to understand that so well that he could articulate it back to them and then make an appeal in a way that pricked people's conscience. That's why, even though he was the most hated, he still was the most respected because he had that gift. So what am I really saying? What I'm saying is that as I've been listening to our entire conversation, power concedes nothing. This is a power struggle. This is a struggle that is age old. Divide and conquer. Keep people fighting amongst themselves, you know, arguing at each other, you know, going back, you know, and forth with each other. And those that are at the level of controlling the power and the narrative, so to speak, are continuing to keep their system in place. And so my daddy, what he did, and I think that's why he was dangerous, he was able to help people understand who you are as people, as humanity, the power of the people. And he was able to stay so focused on that in a way that the people were galvanized together and organized in a way. Not everybody, we know it wasn't everybody, but there was a mass, a critical mass of them that were organized and moved together and stayed connected on messaging and narrative. And that's what we have to do. What happens now is we let, and I hate, you're not in media the traditional way, but we let media sidetrack us.
Mhm.
You know, and unlike me and Nehemiah, who said, why should I come down to talk to you while I'm doing this work? That's a distraction. You're trying to get me in a back and forth with you and focused on your agenda. I need to stay on our agenda. So even when you think about the letter from the Birmingham jail, Jose, that you read, you know, my problem said, if I took out time to respond to all these different people who criticize me, etc., you know, I would never be able to do the work that I'm doing. But he felt that was that particular time was critically important because of who they represented as clergy persons and him being in the clergy and what was happening in that moment. We have to be intelligent enough and disciplined enough not to continue to get drawn into their conversation and keep our agenda at the forefront and stay on message and collect all of this, organize all of this into a master communication plan. I can't say that enough. What seems to be missing is the organization and the coordination of messaging that creates a larger narrative. There's power in that. I believe it. I saw how he was able to do it. You know, when you think about Jose, you know, when you met John Lewis, you know, when you start listening to some of those people, it's like they all had this similar messaging. There was certain buzz things you would hear coming from them over and over again. They really modeled each other, so to speak, in that regard. So, you know, I think that's what we have to do. But clearly, let me just say this again to everybody listening: we as the people have a lot of power. We just don't know it. We haven't figured out how to collectively organize it. Daddy said before he left here at Mountaintop Speech, he said, stick together. He talked about that divide and conquer tactic that it's been going on forever. And so we cannot let, going back to your point, Teresa, we cannot let what the alternative agenda is to divide us. And when I say divide can be just as clearly as they pick you off and get you distracted. And you're in this back and forth. And then your energy is wasted. You know, now you're exhausted and you're tired. Stop trying to defend everything. Stay on the offensive because truth is powerful. It does not need any defense. It just needs to be spoken over and over and over again. That's why he can recite those words of others, that truth crushed the earth will rise again. No lie can live forever. But we have a responsibility to keep repeating it, keep saying it, and not get sidetracked by somebody else's agenda and going all off and then lose momentum. So I don't know if I lost everybody, but I just had to express that.
No,
because I'm tired of the
it.
divide and conquer. I'm tired of seeing people just even think about this. Those Republicans, those Democrats, we are brothers and sisters. The people at the top, the people with agendas, you know, media has no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests that keep us going back and forth. So those Republicans are our brothers and sisters. Right. They have real issues. We see that now. They're recognizing the quiet storm rising up to a real storm. MAGA. They're upset. Some of them now. They see it, but we don't talk to each other because they got us believing those are those MAGAs. Those are those Trumpers. Those are those, you know, because they're trying to keep their power concentrated. So they have to make a boogeyman. You, my brother, become the boogeyman. Our undocumented brothers and sisters become the boogeyman. One season is the black folks, another season is the brown folks, another season is on our sheltered people. It's the same old, over and over again.
And it's rehearsed and rehashed so much that while we say undocumented today, undocumented been a thing since the beginning of this nation. They used to call it freedom papers. So if you don't have your people undocumented, okay. So there's this notion of that a white male or a government run by a white male figure must sign a document in order to infuse you with humanity has been a notion of this nation since the founding. So we are literally going in a direction to go against the nature of this nation and nurture it to a better form, to a better reality, and to truly, I believe, its actual potential because of the great people that are inside. I want to now take the opportunity to introduce the young lady that I said in the beginning would be here with us. Maria Teresa is joining the conversation. Thank you, dear sister, for being here. And Maria Teresa Kumar, President and CEO of Voto Latino. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. Now, I'm hot and ready to go ahead and just throw a question to you. Is that okay with you? Your volume is low.
Oh, there we go. You think
okay, now we're good.
I'd figure this out. It's so nice to have Dr. King. I was here. I heard a lot of what you were having to say, and I think that what you were saying is absolutely on the money. Thank you for having the conversation, and Jose Antonio, thank you for sharing your journey every single time. Hola, Teresa. Nice to see you.
Hola, María Teresa.
Let me ask you about stories that are left out. Stories that are left out of the national narrative, and this engaging of basically erasure. We see it happening on the policy level. It's so interesting that as I'm talking to my daughter, who's she's a junior in college, and she's seeing what used to be the bigoted conversations of individuals at a dinner table become actual policy. These things have been said for a long time. Now it's becoming law. This is a much different era. What do you say to that about these stories that are intentionally being manipulated out of the framework of truth?
So, Dr. G, first of all, I think that one of the biggest reasons that America is living the moment that we are is because there has been an erasure and absence of narrative in the Latino American experience. And I have to share with you that one of the ways that we're able to socialize America, American history, who we are, is through that storytelling. I remember when I was a little girl, and one of the first shows when we came to America that my mother and I watched was Roots. And I remember the poignant story of understanding that experience as a little girl and what it meant in forming an understanding of American history. I remember when we were talking about police reform at a young age, and it was always understanding with Rodney King what that meant. And when we look at the storytelling when it comes from the perspective of inserting the Latino experience, it is absent. And I can tell you that what we're seeing today is a culmination of that. It is the reason why you have a demagogue at the White House right now being able to lay the blame of the ills of this country on the feet of supposedly undocumented, but we all understand that he means Latino disproportionately. We understand that dog whistle. And I can tell you that when you look, and Dr. King, you mentioned the media, and so did you, Jose Antonio, is one of the things that even watching the media coverage right now of how they are describing the undocumented experience of the United States doesn't feel like they understand the undocumented experience in the United States. It doesn't feel like they understand what it means to be Latino in the United States. If anything, when you see a camera that goes viral of a video of a man chasing a farmer who's about to pick this man's lettuce for dinner, it doesn't cause recoil. It causes voyeurism. It causes this idea of a fascination of the plight of what's happening to the undocumented community through a lens that it is not attached to the dignity of simply being human, if that makes sense. And I have to share with you, the moment that I saw Senator Padilla being handcuffed, well, not handcuffed, he got arrested, but the moment that he walked out of that chamber, of that press conference, and to see him go silent, and to see his hands up, to see him kneel, to see him quiet, that was one of the hardest experiences I had to watch, because it is the fear of every single brown and black mother to see a parent, to see their child that way, to see that in that moment he was relegated to indignity, that his titles, that his education, that who he stood for, what he stood for, his ancestry and what he was fighting for meant nothing. And that he went to the rote exercise of putting his hands up in silence, kneeling down, and thank God that the cameras were rolling. And I have to say that, as much as we talk about, was also the Latino experience that no one knows about. That fear of law enforcement, while we respect it, we also fear it. But no one would know, because no one talks about the Latino American experience of what it means to be Latino in this country. I was very fortunate to grow up in California, but I was also fortunate to grow up during Proposition 187. And I say fortunate because I was able to see that in my sleepy town of Sonoma, California, the most progressive town one can say, the moment 187 passed, neighbor turned upon neighbor. They assumed that the moment you walked out of that house and on the road, that you did not have any rights, that you were somehow not meant to be here, recognizing that the Latino community is what makes that city thrive. And having fast forward to what we saw in Arizona with Show Me Your Paper laws during Proposition SB 1070, then we saw it in Georgia, we saw Atlanta. It's almost as if the reason this is allowed to happen is because, Dr. Richey, to your point, we do not have narratives and humanization of the Latino experience. We do not have our origin stories. And not only do we not have it for the broad stream, we don't have it amongst ourselves. If you look at American history, for the most part, is told east of the Mississippi. There's no understanding of what happened in the Latino experience in mass migration when it comes to this, into Arizona or Texas or New Mexico or California for that matter. And so the socialization, fast forward, where we're going to be 250 years young next year, you might as well have thought that the Latino community just started arriving yesterday. And as a result, you have this inability to truly feel the coverage, the pain that the community is feeling. I can tell you that there's not a Latino that I have not spoken to, regardless of how many generations they've been here or how recently they arrived, that does not walk around now with more papers on them, whether it's identification or a passport, concerned what happens if I accidentally get profiled, even if they could be a US citizen. But the pain is real and palatable. And I think that is why, Dr. King, the fact you're having this conversation right now that is intersectional, that is multicultural, speaking about the moment, is what is missing. And I am grateful that you're having it, because to your point earlier, they're trying to pit our communities against each other because they recognize that we have the same needs, the wants, desires, and that collectively we could affirm the proposition of what this country is meant to be. But that affirmation means that they're going to have to share.
I'm going to ask you, what can we do? But before I get to that, because there are a lot of people that are watching this, a lot of people will watch it even beyond this moment. And we've had these and continue to have them, the black and brown or brown and black coalitions, et cetera. Let me pose it this way. The erasure effect. It requires that you completely flip the narrative. For example, years ago, state legislatures passed laws that made it illegal for teachers to teach about the KKK with what's called moral deference. They were playing chess. The other side was playing checkers.
Right.
So they were already creating the groundwork, the blueprint to implement the next phase, which was a complete reversal to where in Florida, you literally have a curriculum that says, well, you know, slavery actually has some good things connected to it, right? Well, but you got to look at what happened 8 years prior to that. So there's a retelling of the story. The Boston Tea Party wasn't no damn party. That would have been considered an act of criminal and property damage. Civil and criminal liability would have been affixed. They would have been on Rice Street in Atlanta if they would have done that here. Right. So we call it a tea party because of who gets to tell or retell their story and the erasure that happens through history. We got folk lying to us about history when we can look at it on YouTube today, and they would tell you what you saw did not happen. So definitely things that have happened prior, we take it and accept it. But I'm starting to believe we may have had a whole lot of things wrong in our history books. So what do we do as people that care about people, and I'm including all my brothers and sisters in that, to make sure that your story doesn't get lost? Because if your story gets lost, my story gets lost. If I don't say nothing when you're knocking at my neighbor's door, I don't have a neighbor to say anything when they're knocking at mine.
So I think one is having these conversations, right? Mm-hmm. The more that we can actually have intersectional conversations and understand our experiences, I think that those are dialogues. I think that Dr. King, you should probably take this across the country and do town halls, not just with the folks that agree with us, but the folks that disagree with us. Dr. Richey, one of the things that you said that really resonated was this idea that when you are uncomfortable, that means we're growing. One of the greatest exceptions I have is when people say, well, we want to create tolerance. I don't want to create tolerance. I want to create real rooted conversations where we create acceptance, where we accept who we are and we recognize what those narratives, what those stories, what those talents bring forth to create something much bigger and better. And I do think that it is in those spaces where we are challenged right now because we do try to create environments where everyone's comfortable all the time. But if we're always comfortable all the time, then we cannot actually stretch ourselves to change and to heal through conversations, through meals. And so in this narrative change, like one is, how do we help you get this on the road? And I mean that sincerely. How do we make sure, though, that they're also held accountability when it comes to the individuals that are sitting in the different media seats, who are sitting and investing in different, in different programming? And one of the things that I can share with you is that if we can't have a diverse media, not just in front of the camera, but the person calling the shots, we actually can't have a real conversation of where America is. I'll just give you a brief example. In 2017, I was doing a special show with MSNBC, and one of the headlines out of the New York Times at that moment read, "Race relations in the United States, in America, are all-time low." I said, huh. So I went in, and being the nerd that I am, Dr. Richey, I actually wanted to see who they polled. And shocking, not shocking, it was a completely binary poll. It was black and white. And that sent me down a rabbit hole because at that moment, Latinos were 20% of the population, the second largest population in America. And it turns out that if you are doing most polls about what Americans think, whether you're talking about healthcare, whether you're talking about the environment, whether you're talking about race relations, whether you're talking about clinical trials, I mean, the list goes on. We actually don't know what Americans think because we are omitting the second largest population of Americans and the fourth largest population of Americans who happen to be indigenous and also the Asian community, right? So in reality, for the last 15 years, as America has become more multicultural, more multiracial, we actually have no idea what Americans think because we haven't pushed ourselves to ask the hard questions that may make us uncomfortable, but that can also help us meet the moment to address everything from policy to racism to education. And I do think that that is where we have to start making different types of demands. And I do think that young people have decided that by not watching traditional cable news, where they don't see themselves in their narratives, because we have a generation of young people who are incredibly multiracial. But what has happened as a result is that they are now going into places that don't have any side of oversight. They are constantly being fed what I would say, non-accurate news, and hoping that they'll get some accuracy. So I do think that there's an opportunity to figure out how do we hold media companies accountable, but also encourage them that when there is diversity in their stories, where their growing audience sees themselves, there's a possibility of not just narrative change, but also a business opportunity in that respect. But I also do think that we need to figure out how do we have more conversations across stripes of people so that we could figure out how do we heal as a nation, recognizing our faults with this opportunity to actually build forward to our possibility.
Well said. Well said. I'm going to open it up to the audience Q&A. We have some questions that have already come in. My first question comes from California. It is to Ms. Romero. This is Victor M. in Cali. Quote, what moral responsibility does America have to protect the very workers who sustain its economy, but often remain unseen? And we talked a little bit about that earlier, that agriculture is the number one industry on the planet, period. But the agricultural worker is not the number one highest paid, most respected, most honored, most revered human being on the planet. So to Victor M. in California, what do you say to him?
I think we all have the moral responsibility of recognizing and respecting the work that we all do. I mean, I have the privilege to serve farm workers, and I'm speaking for farm workers. But I think we cannot separate us for the work that we do, the country that we come from, the language that we speak, the color of our skin. We need to understand that we have all a moral responsibility to ensure that every single person is treated with dignity and respect, and that every person, whether they're undocumented or documented, has the right to have a life, that it is respected, that it is what they want to do, that they can raise their family, and it doesn't matter where they come from. That's all our responsibility, all of us.
Very well said. Second question to Dr. Bernice King. This comes from Mississippi. Rachel F. in Mississippi says, how does your father's vision of the world house challenge the way we respond to immigration today?
Wow. Well, here's the issue. There are those of us who obviously understand the value and dignity of every human being. Unfortunately, many of us who feel that way are not in the positions where a lot of this inhumane stuff is taking place, and that's part of the problem. And so, we have got to figure out how to inject humanization into what's happening right now. This may or may not have been done. A lot of these agents, ICE agents, they are us. Yeah. They have issues. They have families. They have children. And in their minds, they're just doing their job. But I do think we have to find a way to penetrate even some of them. Because what's happening now is that the courage to resist holistically is lacking. You have those of us who are not in those positions, who are speaking up, who are challenging, etc. But you have people on the inside who are in, quote unquote, doing their job or enforcing the law. So how do we penetrate them so that we can bring humanization to all of this and shift what's happening. Because the first thing is this targeting, this terrorizing, trampling upon everything you can think of that's happening is despicable. It's, as a human, I'm thinking about right now as we talk about this, I'm thinking about those police officers in Birmingham who, after the Children's March, remember on the Children's March, the officers had water hoses, dogs, and billy clubs, and they unleashed them on those young people. It was the most inhumane thing that you could imagine at that time. And there was a time after that when Bull Connor literally wanted to do the same thing on a group of people. That group of people banded together, they got on their knees, and they began to pray. And when they got up, something happened to appeal to those officers where they could not even carry out the command. I don't know how we create that right now, but some kind of way there are neighbors, there are people that we know that are in those worlds. And that's what I meant about, we got to figure out how the people connect so we can break up this power play that's destroying humanity, that's disregarding humanity, that's not being thoughtful about how we, in a mature way, address immigration. So, that's what I think. I mean,
that's so powerful, Dr. King, because the simple becomes the profound. And when I try to explain or justify, we're all on our journeys. At this stage of my spiritual journey, I'm trying to learn through intent to be non-judgmental. I picked the right time to do it, obviously.
Than I am, Dr. Richey.
Well, I've learned that you don't really become non-judgmental. What you do is you express an unconditional love. It doesn't mean, it doesn't mean you have to agree or you can't say discernible dynamics from the conclusive evidence or have an opinion about things. But there is still this unconditional love, because I believe there's something very divine about every human being. There's something very divine about this whole thing. I can't quite put my hand on it. And because of that fundamental belief, I have to believe that about everybody. And I mean everybody, even when it's challenging. That's especially when I need to believe it, because it goes back to me being true to myself, and to thyself be true. So deconstructing the construct that we've been taught we are, Dr. King, I'm not here to make money. That's not, it's good to make it, but that's actually not why I'm here. I'm not here to make your life miserable. I'm not here to give you a no. I'm just not here. That's not why I'm here. And I don't think that's why you're here. I don't think that's why anybody's here. But all of a sudden, the things that define us become the things that everybody else told us are important, rather than the things that we believe are important, because we simply were told what we need to believe. So this is the third question, and this question comes from New York, and it is to Mr. Vargas. Angela says, what does it mean to live undocumented? And I had the same question. I'm glad it came up in the chat. What does it mean to live undocumented and yet still fight for visibility, respect, and belonging in a country that denies your legal presence? And I want to add to that, do you fear the elements of government? Like, do you have to live in a particular way in order to have mobility? I want to put that out there, because what you're doing is so doggone courageous that it's hard to contextualize the risk that you are in constantly.
He's on mute.
Oh, am I on now? Okay, great. Let me underscore a couple of things that has been said. And by the way, I've been doing this work. We started Divine American in 2011. We have never had a conversation like this. I have never been a part of a conversation quite like this. So echoing what Maria Teresa said, if you want to take this on the road, please let us know. And I actually think taking this on the road in places where we can make people really uncomfortable is the best place to be doing it. I've done maybe 2,000 events in 49 states in 14 years. I've been everywhere but Alaska. I've gone to all the Tea Party people. So there's nobody I won't talk to. That's my commitment to this. To answer your question more directly, just the legal realities, right? So I have not been able to leave the country for 31 years after arriving here in 1993. Because if I leave, there's no guarantee I'd be allowed back. I don't want to say that I'm stuck, because, hey, I've been everywhere in America, within the continental United States. I was supposed to go to Puerto Rico for a New Year's Eve thing a few years back. And then my lawyers was like, okay, you can go, but we're not quite sure what would happen if you came back, if they had allowed you back in. So there's just legal limitations. I have to say, though, that my freedom, which is here and here, is because I was so lucky to have grown up in the school district that I grew up in which my 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Zahner, assigned my after-school book club to read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. That was the first book that I was obsessed by. And that book, as you all know, is all about what happens. Toni Morrison said she wrote the book because she said what happens when someone surrenders to the master narrative. And somehow, and I think Maria Teresa was saying, this is the power of storytelling. That book was all about this young Black girl who wanted to have blue eyes because she was led to believe that blue eyes was better. Somehow, I related that to what it means to be this illegal alien, that I did not want to surrender to what people think that is. And so long as I'm free here and here, I'm borderless here. My mind is borderless. It can go anywhere. So long as I have that, and that's the message, by the way, that I try to send to a lot of young people. You know, I'm 44 now. I was a dreamer. You know, the Dream Act, the dreamer, when young undocumented kids were brought here as children. I'm on the elder dreamer side of that equation, right? Thank God for moisturizing. Really important. What really pains me is when I meet young undocumented students in high school or in college now who have surrendered, who have started internalizing what this president and what this administration says about them. And I think that's really dangerous. And when I look at the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, and what he thought about education, you know, I remember when I went, there's an organization in Georgia called Freedom University, which is all about supporting undocumented students in the state of Georgia. I can only imagine that Dr. Martin Luther King must be smiling from heaven, looking down, knowing that these people of all different races and backgrounds are fighting the fight that he fought, and that the King Center continues to fight. So to me, making those, I cannot tell you what comfort I get from studying Black history in this country. Black people that have built this country from the beginning, who are still fighting for their equal rights. I find a lot of inspiration in the resilience of that and the clarity of that, that this country, which is still young, is still very much in the middle of its experiment. And the last point I want to make is what Maria Teresa is saying, because Maria Teresa and I grew up in California, in kind of the Bay Area. In the state of California, 60% of California is Latino and Asian. 60%. You add the Black population, 67% of California is people of color. The numbers are there. This country will only be more Latino, more Asian, more Black, and more mixed race. That is our demographic destiny. Now, what does it mean to define American? What does it mean to talk about human rights with that kind of clarity?
That's a perfect segue into our theme, third theme about coalition building and democracy. Presidential centers, presidential nonprofit, the libraries, they typically don't get involved in domestic political affairs at all. However, I happen to be a co-consultant with a Republican named Don Balfour, former Georgia state senator. He's older, I'm younger. He's Republican, I'm not. However, this brother is my friend and is a remarkable human being. I know that because I work with him at the Carter Center in this democracy program that has to focus on figuring out how to keep civility in American politics, which is something no one ever thought would have to become a focus of a presidential center. Now, coalition building and democracy. There was a time civility was the goal. The peaceful transition of power was celebrated. Shaking a hand or making the phone call to say, congratulations, you beat me, was noble. And there was something honorable about the whole thing. And all of that is it's in the wind. It's gone. And then when it left, people, individuals, started to become the mere reflection of those leaders, so-called. So to Dr. Bernice King, what lessons from the civil rights movement, the era, the stages of awakening, because that whole movement, I don't know what America would be without that movement. The morality of this country absolutely wouldn't be what it is today if it had not been for that movement and those light, those angels of light that your father was and that he led in order to create moral clarity for this nation. What lessons from that must be applied now? I think you're on mute, Dr. King.
I think one of the things that is missing today is a true engagement with studying that movement. I think we picked bits and pieces from it to move forward, and more importantly, we focused heavily upon direct action in our approach to dealing with immigration and so many other issues. So I think the greatest part of this is what truly is nonviolent social change from a Kingian perspective. How does that look? How does that operate? How does that work? I'm going to say this in a delicate way. I don't think I have yet seen, at least it hasn't been highlighted that way, any efforts lately that seem to represent what that movement was immersed in, because it's when we think about nonviolence, most of us, we think about a physical part to all of this. We don't think about mindset. We don't think about language. In today's culture, our language has veered off when we're speaking about adversaries or opponents or those who have done harmful things to us. We're drawn into their energy. We're not drawing them into our energy. And I think that's what that movement was able to do. It was able to stay on the high plane, as Daddy said, and I have a dream as we move forward, to stay on the high plane of dignity and discipline in this movement. So I think we have to reach back and truly immerse ourselves in the principles of nonviolence first and foremost, because there is a philosophical basis. There is a mindset. As we said at the King Center, nonviolence is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. And then as we have to organize people around those principles, that's what Daddy did when you talk about the practicality of the steps that they followed, how they leveraged direct action, how they used negotiation and where that comes into play, how they had to constantly self-examine to make sure that they could remain in a nonviolent posture. Nonviolence works. And I don't think we are working it right. Just in my humble opinion, I don't think we'll work from a Kingian perspective. I can't speak from other schools of nonviolence, but from a Kingian perspective, I'm not sure we have immersed ourselves enough in the study of it to understand. So my selfish plug is, I'm telling you, it's deeper than the movement. It's an inside-out approach. It's not whether they change, it's whether it's what you said earlier, Dr. Richey, you were talking about it's because of who you are. We don't let them alter us. Our goal is to stay grounded in who we are and the belief that who we are will expose the ugliness of who they are, and even to themselves, that something in them is reattached to their original, supposed to be who we originally were created to be. So,
I would love for you to go into a little more detail about the truth of non-violence not simply being an element of physical combat, that non-violence is a holistic approach, because that has been, in my opinion, lost to many, especially when we are defining this by the terms that violent people gave us.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you're right, because the action is a shadow. The thought is the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
How do we engage and learn to transform inside out when everything around us is designed to transform us outside in?
Well, that's why I say we have to study this. I mean, the King Center has an online experience. I suggest everybody do it. Everybody that I know that's been through it, at least, it does something to them inside. I mean, invariably, there are different stories, and most times it doesn't affect them first in terms of what's happening in society. Now, I'm going to share something in a sophisticated way because I'm not supposed to share it, but I'm going to try to do it the best way that I know how. A lot of people who are in positions now, carrying out certain orders, are having issues in their own home domestically. So if we got to do something so that people can have peace within, so that they're not creating war without.
That's right.
So again, we really need to study this. I'm just, since you're on our platform, I'm just going to say that. Please go to thekingcenter.org and log on to the Nonviolence 365 Institute. You'll never regret it. You'll never regret it. And I mean, that's because it's not something I can just say and you just go read a book. You can read a book. You can go online right now and see the six principles and the 6 steps. But it really does something to you, and it starts you on your own journey. And then it begins to spill out, because it has transformed me, through assassination, 5, uncle mysteriously found, not drowned, but found in his pool. We think it was tied to my father's assassination some kind of way, because he was present. At 11 years old, my grandmother shot in church. So you can imagine what happened to me as a child during that time when, quote unquote, violence wasn't normalized in this way. And she was shot in church. Think about that back then, that was just unheard of. So I developed a lot of anger and almost bitterness, and began to hate all white people, white men in particular. And so I was very violent with my tongue. Fortunately, I didn't have anything around me by way of a gun, because I probably would have used it. So nonviolence through time with my ministry calling, because I'm a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, coming together and joining forces has helped to heal me internally and do what you just said. It's difficult to become totally non-judgmental. I mean, we all have our own value system, our thoughts and our opinions, but there is a way to value the human being even when you disagree with them, and still give them their dignity and be thoughtful about how to do that.
That's right. It's about your intent when you step up, your intent. And sometimes we figure out the middle ground by exploring the polarity on both sides, and understand why peace is so required. This next
Let me
question.
say this just to add. Let me add this.
Mhm.
This doesn't mean you excuse or dismiss or deny injustice.
That's right.
It just means the way you fight it, it doesn't cause you to become unjust in the
There you
process.
go. There you go. I tell my production team something that's different than what I used to say. Instead of me taking 15 minutes to fight against this entity that has done this, or this organization that has done this, how about I spend 1 minute stating the fact pattern and 14 minutes advocating for those who have been disenfranchised? That's a different approach. But now I'm resonating to the thing I care about in the first place anyway, which is the advocacy for those who have been harmed. How much time we got? Okay. All right. We got a few more minutes, and I want to make sure we get this question into Mr. Vargas, because I think it's only fair to ask you as well. How do Black and Brown communities stand together now? And there's been some hurt on both sides. Some things have been said, as you know, on both sides. So what will it take today?
A dear friend who supports Divine American, she's been supporting Divine American for a while now through the Pop Culture Collaborative. Bridget Evans is her name. Maria Teresa probably knows who she is as well. She's a big justice collaborator for us. She said to me, sometimes it's hard to leapfrog to, like, we're in this together, like we're kumbayaing without acknowledging the hurt and without acknowledging what's actually really in front of us, which is, to be an immigrant in this country. I'm Filipino, and I'll never forget the first time one of my grandfather's sister, so my grandmother on my grandfather's side, I told her that I was going to Oakland, which is about an hour away from where I grew up. And she said, Oakland, that's where the Black people are. Why are you going there? And I'm like, wait, what? So I was maybe 14 years old, 14, 15 years old. And I did not quite have the vocabulary. Now, mind you, I had only been in the country for 3 years. And yet here's this woman who immigrated here in 1969, who's the reason why all of us were here, because after she came here, she petitioned everybody else. It's what anti-immigrant people call chain migration, right? And yet she had internalized this idea because of the media she was consuming. Because mind you, she didn't know any Black people. The only Black people she knew was the Black people that was being presented on TV and in the news. Somehow she believed that Black people were dangerous, and now she was passing it along to me. Thankfully, I was already introduced to Toni Morrison's work by then. I was already being introduced to James Baldwin. So I had kind of a narrative going, wait a second, like, without Black people, without the civil rights movement, and let me be really plain about this. So, for example, there are about 20 million Asian people in this country. People of Asian descent are actually the fastest growing immigrant group in America. And we are here because of the civil rights movement. If the civil rights movement had not happened, the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act would not have changed. And that lifted the quota that allowed people from around the world to come to this country. And it just so happened that actually the largest proportion of that, percentage-wise, have been from Asian countries. So people who are of Asian descent who are here has a direct line of debt to the civil rights movement. And yet, anti-Blackness in the Asian American community, within Koreans, within Chinese, within Filipinos, within Indians, is something that we have to grapple with. So I think as we work towards solidarity and intersectionality, I don't think we can just leapfrog and say, wait a second, let's not acknowledge that there are barriers. And this is Maria Teresa's point. The media we're consuming and the stories and the narratives that are being sold about us have been woefully incorrect. And to kind of segue a little bit, because my name is Jose Antonio Vargas, right? And so people always think I'm Latino. When you see an Asian person with a Latino name, it means they're Filipino, just FYI. I cannot tell you how I did not realize how anti-Mexican this country is until I started traveling in the South, Alabama, Arkansas. People would literally use the terms Mexican and illegal interchangeably, right? Because they think I'm Mexican, and then I correct them, and then I'm like, wait a second, what are you saying about Mexican people, right? Mexicans in this country right now are what the Germans were in the 19th century, the dominant ethnic group, 45 million people, right? Out of the 65. And wait a second, I think it's 40 million out of the 65. So they're the dominant ethnic group in America, what the Germans were in the 19th century in America. And yet, how little we know. As we're sitting here right now, it's hard to think of a Mexican American who's in charge of a news organization. Maria Teresa, can you think of anybody? I mean, Maria Hinojosa has her own platform, which is amazing. Of course, Jorge Ramos was with Univision. But I can't think of a single Mexican American who's in charge of any news organization in America today. And that's irresponsible.
Wow. We have 4 minutes left, 3 minutes and some change to be more accurate. I'm going to go to our lightning round, but I want to ask this question from the audience first. What support can be provided to immigrants who may be fearful of being deported by ICE? And naturally, anyone who has expertise in that arena can answer that question.
I just want to say that the question is, and I agree with the question, being abducted by ICE. They're not detained, and I said it earlier, they're being kidnapped by these people that are masked. Right now, there's a lot of organizations, and some, are here that are trying to help immigrants in different ways. We are looking for people who want to be a part of a movement that is going to make a change in people's lives. We're looking for people that are willing to make calls and talk to their elected officials. We're looking for people who are willing to volunteer their time and be present when people are being arrested and being there to make sure that we know where they're going. We need people who are going to be able to listen to what is happening to immigrants and to be a voice, the voice that some of them can be. Jose Antonio Vargas is very brave, but not many people feel the same way. They're terrified. So we need the engagement from our communities, from our leaders, to be able to protect these people. I just wanted to add, because we were talking about nonviolence, and I wanted to quote Caesar. It says, nonviolence is not inaction. It is not discussion. It is not for the timid or weak. Nonviolence is hard work. So we're talking and looking for people who are willing to do the hard work to protect immigrants in this country.
Thank you for that. And Jim, thank you for that question. 1 minute and some change left. We're going to go to a lightning round. One word answers. Briefly respond. I'm going to take my first question to Dr. King. One word that describes the future you're building. One word.
She's on mute.
It's actually 2 words: beloved community.
Love it. And let me go to Mr. Vargas on this one. Okay, I got a few seconds left. Complete this sentence. To be human is to what?
To be free.
Ms. Romero, I got a few seconds. One overlooked truth about immigrants. What would it be?
Their honesty and passion, and I don't know that there is only one more, but honesty, passion, and dedication.
There it is. And with that, we're out of time. It has been a pleasure. Thank you, every single one of you. God bless you for the work that you continue to do to advocate for humanity. And because of you all, we will get there. Thank you so much, Dr. King. Great opportunity to serve as a moderator today. Thank you for joining us. For the audience, to the beloved community and this beloved community talk. Greatly appreciate it. Tonight, we laid some stones, foundation, planted some seeds, and may have corrected some narratives, but it's nothing without you, every single one of you. May we leave with our hearts intact and encouragement on our back. Whatever you believe, do. Have a beloved day.
Save the date. Join us on Saturday, September 13th for the Beloved Community International Expo at the King Center. Experience the beauty of global culture right on Sweet Auburn Avenue with performances, food, music, art, and traditions from over 35 countries. It's a journey around the world you won't want to miss. Come celebrate Dr. King's vision of peace, unity, and nonviolence. One day, one world, one community. See you there.
Birmingham was a place where they put the movement into song. There were some of the best voices. And I mean, everybody loved to sing. Every mass meeting, the first half hour was nothing but singing freedom songs. And that would not only get you emotionally worked up to overcome your fears, but it would get you inspired and courageous to make you want to do something about your fears and not give in to them.
The King Center, founded by Coretta Scott King, is the official institution of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, championing and developing nonviolent leaders. In 2024, we impacted over 100,000 youth, equipped 150 interns, and trained over 2,000 leaders in nonviolent strategies. Join King 100 as we build King Center 2.0, empower 500,000 youth, and train 1 million individuals on Nonviolence 365. Join the movement at thekingcenter.org. Text MLK Give to 44321.